They used to tell me it's alcoholism, not alcoholism. Once you have the illness, you always have the illness. And then it's the responsibility of the patient who has it, the person who has it, and certainly the family who's impacted by the illness of addiction, to see what they might do to not only help their loved one, but to help themselves. And so what we found in the course of the experience of the treatment of addiction, that a family systems approach to the treatment of addiction was the most beneficial to the identified, and I always hate to use that word, identified patient and the family. So we began to, in the course of the experience of the treatment, to include families in treatment, because it was very important that they begin to have an understanding of the illness and how it works, the dynamics of the illness, so that they might be able to not only see it, but that they might have some experience with the recovery of the illness that is beneficial to not only the family members as individuals, but as the family as a unit. So what's that have to do with the therapeutic value, the steps of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous? And why is that so beneficial in treatment centers? And why is it the preferred method of treatment and ongoing recovery? Because this is an illness that the person who has it has to be vigilant and participate in their recovery for the remainder of their life if they so wish to do so. I don't know about the people who don't continue because I don't see them anymore. But the people that do continue, you get to see them year after year, month after month, and day after day. But what is it that we do in treatment that has a therapeutic value or a clinical application for the treatment? And how is that so intertwined with what was discovered back in 1936, 37, 38, when they founded Alcoholics Anonymous? How does that all integrate into some kind of a plan? See, a clinical application has to have a plan. It has to have an order to it. As a matter of fact, one of the problems in the illness of alcoholism is disorder. Life becomes disordered. And so the person who has it, if they were at one time a very disciplined person, become undisciplined. And so when they arrive at the treatment center doors, this discipline is really addressed into the application of the treatment by having the people that come to treatment experience what's called a 12-step experience in the road, if you want to call it a road to recovery. Now my mouth is getting very dry. And when I used to have a dry mouth, I'd drink whiskey.
Would you drink water instead?
Whiskey. Or beer. I was a beer drinker. I used to say, I can't be alcoholic. All I drink is beer. I said, well, how much do you drink? Well, I said, a lot of beer. But you know, that wasn't the truth either. Because one of the hallmarks of the illness of alcoholism is that the person who has it has a drink, excuse me. Oh man, it's cold. I'm 86 years old.
Yeah.
No, I can spell it. Right? Come on. So where was I?
You were drinking.
Drinking. I forgot where I was. I'm 86 years old.
0.163.
So I'm gonna skip. 164, yes.
All right.
So, what happens at the treatment center? I think that's where I was.
Yeah.
Coming into and integrating what we know clinically, with what the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is starting. Now there's 100 12-step programs, but the 12 steps are really the centerpiece of the recovery from addiction. I asked somebody one day, I don't know when it was, if you had to give a clinical name to the 12-step movement, Alcoholics Anonymous, NA, CA, all the other A's, what would it be? You know what he said to me? He said it's a behavior modification program. That's what it is. A behavior modification program. The person's behavior will change if they will participate in the instructions of recovery as provided by the treatment center. And once they leave the treatment center into the Alumni Association, and then along with their alumni experience, Alcoholics Anonymous, or Narcotics Anonymous, or Cocaine Anonymous, or Overeaters Anonymous, whatever the case may be, the 12 steps are the same for all of the other programs that flow from the original grandparent, I like to call them, the grandparent of all the 12-step programs, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because most of the time, when we receive patients into treatment, and I went to treatment, by the way, in 1974. I was in treatment at Hawthorne Community Hospital in Hawthorne, California. And that building is still there. The hospital is long gone. It was called Hawthorne Community Hospital, then Robert F. Kennedy Hospital, and then they closed the hospital down. As a matter of fact, there were treatment programs for addiction in many hospitals across the country. As a matter of fact, there was a real big acceleration of the treatment of alcoholism in that hospital setting. Am I okay? Okay. In a hospital setting for many, many years. And the last big hospital, a medical center that I had the honor of working with, Hope Hospital in Newport Beach. And they still have a program to this day. So we're to what they call the steps of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, which the patients or the clients or the residents hear. It's interesting. You know, we talk about alcoholism being an illness, and yet we very much shy away from, unless we're in a medical center, the term patient to the person who has the illness. So many times they're called clients, sometimes called residents, sometimes called patients, but it's all the same, really, with the exception of medical detoxification. And medical detoxification is on an island of its own. Many people don't think that that's the beginning of treatment, but it really is. It really is. So it's the first time that we're going to bring the patient from an active using situation or an active drinking situation into a medical detoxification. So maybe somehow, as their head clears, they will be able to at least be open. That's an interesting word. I want to talk about that for a second, about families and their loved one. And as a matter of fact, the staff at the treatment center, and certainly the participants in the program of recovery, are open-minded. Open-minded. Be open. Be open to information that flows in, to consider that it might be legitimate information and it applies to you, or you put it on the side and file it, but don't throw it away. Don't throw it away. So many patients, as they complete treatment and move on back into their lives, into their community programs of recovery, really begin to let go of things that they learned at the treatment center. So here's what I learned. Every night at Hawthorne Community Hospital in 1974, you know what they did? They took us to AA meetings. I'm telling you, what an embarrassment. I was a big shot. Big job. Wear a suit and tie every day. Taking me to those AA meetings. He took me to an Alano club. I didn't know what even an Alano club was. And some of you may not know what an Alano club is. Well, let me tell you what an Alano club is. An Alano club is a place that conducts or has facilities where you can conduct AA meetings. And there's meetings every day of the week, and many times during the day. Well, they weren't a very nice-looking group to me. And so my first impression was that I wasn't very interested in being with the men and women of Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholic was a word we never used in my family, and both of my parents were alcoholic. If we would have ever called my father an alcoholic, oh my, or a drunk, oh. But he was an alcoholic. My mom, I'm not sure. She's one of those people who would drink along with her husband until many times she could drink as much as her husband. And then my mom could drink as much as my father. But anyhow, I'm from an alcoholic family, so that gives me a little perspective that has some experience with it of what I would imagine the children of alcoholics today have to experience in their families as they grow up. Anyhow, here is the long and the short of it. The long and the short of it is that they sent us to these AA meetings. And it wasn't long. And then you know what they told us whenever we left? Here's what the suggestion was. Or not the suggestion, let me use another word. Direction. Now that's one of the problems with the illness of addiction. Most people who have this illness do not like to take direction. And I certainly didn't like to take direction. I'm a big shot. I don't take direction, I give direction. And that's the reason I was in the treatment center. Because the thing is, would I be open to accept some direction and to follow some ideas that have really generated into experience for men and women who've had this illness and that have recovered through a seemingly very, very unrelated information. Because when you first look at the steps of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, you say, well, what does that have to do with drinking and drugging? What does that have to do with my illness? And here's where the problem begins to get very serious. If I were a physician, and I'm not a physician, as a matter of fact, my background is in athletics. I was a YMCA director at one time, before I got into this field of addiction treatment. So if I could, they seem to be unrelated. Because if this is an illness, you're asking me to do something that I don't think makes any sense for the treatment of stopping drinking. See, I said I wanted to stop drinking, and I did mean it several times during the course of my drinking. I mean it. I quit. You can count on it. You have my word. And I stopped. How about that? But here's the problem. If one is an alcoholic and they stop, they will always start again. They will always start again. So here's the problem. If I have the motivation to stop, and I have some professional treatment, and I have a program of AA or a 12-step program, I can stay stopped. Because that's the big problem. So I had to find something to stay stopped so that I wouldn't start again, which is the hallmark of the illness of addiction. And these steps, as we call them, seem to have no relation to the problem of staying stopped. So then what happened? What happened was, as if because the others, in my experience, the other alcoholics at Hawthorne Community Hospital, well, they were part of the Alumni Association. And you know what? After all those days in the treatment center, then they said, are you ready for this? 90 meetings in 90 days. Are you kidding me? 90 meetings in 90 days. I'm busy. I'm a big shot. I almost died of big shotism. It almost killed me. It almost killed me. And that's when I learned, that my ego was not my amigo. My ego is not my amigo. When I finished up the program of recovery and treatment at Hawthorne Community Hospital, I realized one thing in particular. I have met the enemy, and the enemy is me. It's not anybody else. It's not my family members. It's not my colleagues at work. It's not my supervisor at work. It's not some of the people that I've met along the way. It's me. It's me. So the recovery from the illness of addiction is the defeat of self. The defeat of self-centeredness. It talks about it in our book about selfishness, self-centeredness. We think this is the root of our problem. Hey, your microphone went off and you can still hear me, right? So how do you like that adjustment?
Can you sing now?
Well, I'm 86 years old. How about that? So the defeat of self. Thank you. I really sort of like it. More energy when I don't have a microphone.
You don't have to. We can hear you.
Or, yeah, but hey, this
I'll keep you in.
is an intimate setting. So where did the motivation come from? The motivation came from the people around me that I began to know, that I began to be friends with. And they had an interesting experience that I identified with. I want to emphasize the word identification. This is the major piece of why we ask our patients, clients, residents to do 90 meetings in 90 days. Don't miss a day. Is because if they do that, that experience will present people, men and women, that they may identify with in their own drinking and drugging experience. So now, here's really what happens. We, us, instead of I and me, we can do together what I could not do alone. And you know, that takes in a lot of life experiences, because many times the resistance to the treatment is that, well, we want to figure it out. This is one of the first things that I did and that I have seen over the years in men and women in Alcoholics Anonymous or any of the recovery programs, they think there's something to figure out. And that doesn't mean we should shortchange the brain. It simply means relax and watch and follow the directions. From who? From the members of the professional staff treatment team and from the men and women that you meet in the 12-step experience that we're insisting occurs while you're in a safe environment at the treatment center for you to carry on in your own recovery. So recovery is sort of like a lifelong experience. It's not a short or an abbreviated experience that you then put down and say, I'm good now, I'm good now. So what are the behaviors? What do I have to change? What am I going to be asked to do? First, you're not going to be asked to do anything that the other members of the patient community, the resident community, is not being asked to do. You're not being asked to do anything that somebody else that you'll meet along the way in the recovery in the 12-step groups hasn't done. So I said this, so I have this experience. I had my first sponsor in Alcoholics Anonymous. I got a sponsor. They said you had to have a sponsor, some smart person that had the experience, show me the way. I said, look, I'm going to tell you something. You want me to read this book? Okay, I'm reading this book. And I'll tell you, you just let me figure it out, and I'll be fine. Give me some time to figure it out. Figure it out, he said. Figure it out? It's all figured out for you. I said, it is? He said, yes, it's in this book called Alcoholics Anonymous. You don't have to figure anything out. Here's the thing I want to know about you, Jerry. Big shot. Are you willing to follow directions? That's really the key. Are you willing to follow directions? And then he said, even if you don't understand it. I said, well, I don't know about that. I've always been taught, I think, I act, I feel. He said, no, Jim, that's true for normal people, but not for you. You feel, you act, and then you think, what the hell did I do? So here's what I've discovered for me. And there's a lot of different kinds of alcoholics. But here's what I figured out for me. It's sort of like the best way to explain it, I think, is in the normal life experience, we grow up. And I grew up. I grew up physically. I grew up intellectually. But I never grew up emotionally. I remember hearing this. It's embarrassing for me to tell you, but I'm going to tell you. Grow up. Grow up, will you? You act like a baby. And I did. I had no emotional maturity at all. And that's not unusual in alcoholic families. I have found that to be true over the years. That's one of the identifications that kept me coming back to recovery, that I met people that had the same experience. and if you have any curiosity at all, you get hooked in right away with people that you identify with. Because you know we have a common experience then to talk about. That's why the 12-step groups are so successful. They identify all over the place. And there's a place for them then. There's a place for me to get well and to stay healthy. I have to tell you this one. I love cigarettes. Oh man, I love love cigarettes. And you know what? I started smoking before I ever started drinking. Oh man, those cigarettes. Man, I can feel that pouring down into my lungs now. And I love cigarettes. I was 15 years in recovery before I was able to put down cigarettes. And I didn't put them down because I'm great. I put them down because I was afraid of dying. That's why I put the cigarettes down. And cigarettes were harder for me to stop than the alcohol was. So it was 15 years sober that I finally was able to put down cigarettes. So what happens in recovery is that along the way we find other stuff, other stuff that we need to take a look at. And so we keep adding those to our recovery and adding those to our recovery until finally we're leading a halfway decent, healthy life. You know, I've done a lot of work in eating disorders. I had no idea what eating disorders was. And the only thing I want to say about that without expanding on that experience is that everybody has to eat. And boy, we really dealt with 4 phases of eating disorders: compulsive overeating, bulimia, bulimorexia, and anorexia. And to be with the patients and the families of that group was an entirely new education for me in the whole field of addiction. I don't think I need to say any more than that, except that I'm now very aware of that illness, whereas before I used to criticize it. Can you imagine me criticizing? I'm 86 years old. Criticize all I want now, right? Yeah. So what are the 12? Well, I want to say one thing that's sort of something that rang true or that stuck with me for a long time. When I was doing this thing with the people that were trying to give me some direction in my program of Alcoholics Anonymous, my sponsors, I've had 3 sponsors now. I've outlived 2, and the current one I have is 94 years old. So I may go through 3, I'm not sure. I'm only 86. I don't know. But anyhow, he said to me when I said, I'll figure it out, etc., etc., he said, you know what? In recovery, we behave ourselves into thinking, healthy thinking. We don't think ourselves into healthy behavior. We behave ourselves into healthy thinking. We don't think ourselves into healthy behavior. I don't understand, I said. He said, I know you don't understand. You do it, and then you'll understand. I said, that's backwards. I understand, then I do it. No, not in recovery. That's one of the paradoxes of recovery. That's one of the things that people will refuse to agree with, refuse to participate with, and they discontinue their recovery. We behave ourselves into healthy thinking. We do it, and then we understand. So what do we do? Well, the first thing we do is that we admitted we were alcoholic and that our lives had become unmanageable. I said, life unmanageable? I'm a big shot. I manage lots of people. I'm successful. Successful? Successful, he said. What are you doing here then? Oh, that's right. I'm in a treatment center. I'm so successful. I wasn't successful about my drinking. So how does one admit and then follow with the behavior? That's the hardest part of the whole program of recovery. It's sort of like follow the herd. Follow the herd. You don't have to lead the herd. As a matter of fact, our suggestion is you get in the middle. Because if you're out on the ends, you're liable to leave too quickly. And we don't want you to leave. We want you to stay. So get in the middle. Get in the middle. With all those people, are you kidding me? Well, they seem to have found a way. Found a way. Found a way. You know, this book that I'm referring to, and if families haven't read it, I would urge you to read that book. It's called Alcoholics Anonymous. It is very informational, and it is very instructional, so that you would understand that what your loved one is being asked to do. And if you'll hook into a program called Al-Anon for family members who love an alcoholic, then you can have some help and experience with what your loved one is doing in the 12 steps of recovery, which we're just talking about the first one right now. Here's what I found for myself about the first one. Admitted I was powerless over alcohol and that my life had become unmanageable? No. I'm here because my wife said I have to be here if I want to have a home, and my boss said I have to be here if I want to have a job. So what am I going to do? Do you think I'm dumb? So I followed the directions, and a strange thing happened. I was following everything to please someone else, and I got help myself. And I really wasn't doing it for me. I was doing it for someone else. I was powerless over alcohol because I had tried to stop many times, and I meant it. And the men and women that I've met in recovery, they've said that they tried to quit many times, and they meant it, but they couldn't stay stopped, as we had just talked about. The next two steps are sort of like faith steps. They're about asking, well, let me put it this way. And this is for the recovering people that are here and the professional staff that are here. They may not know this. So here's something I'm going to say that they may not even know. How about that? The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. So what in the world is that? The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. So what is that? What is that? What is the main thing? Well, it's in this textbook called Alcoholics Anonymous. It's even in italics. And italics means you better pay attention. I learned that in AA. Here's the main thing. That the person who has this illness finds a power greater than themselves and lives by spiritual principles. That's the whole program of recovery. That's the whole program of recovery. Now, there's all kind of stuff that flows from that, but that's the centerpiece. And you know, when I came to AA, there's a lot of people talked about this thing they call the big book this, the big book that, the big book this, the big book that. They were called big book thumpers. I didn't like the thumpers at all. Thumpers. Then I became a thumper. And here's a quote that you can check me out on. The main thing is on page 93 of our textbook, Alcoholics Anonymous. And it sums up all that we do in recovery into this sentence about the main thing. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 are all sort of like notes in a song. 4 and 5 are together, 6 and 7 are together, 8 and 9 are together. Do you know what they asked me to do? They asked me to, first of all, they asked me to write my life story, they call it, life story. I wrote a life story. Then they told me to write a fourth step. That was the big changer in my recovery. This is the instruction that was the hardest for me to follow when I started the program of recovery, because it included another person. I had to disclose my fourth step with another person. And there was all kinds of suggestions as to who you might do that with. I happened to do that with my sponsor. Because my sponsor was a Scotsman from Scotland. Aye. And he had a patch on his eye. Aye. His name was Alex. We used to go in restaurants and he'd scare all the little kids. He'd pretend he was a pirate. And go over and say, har, yar, har. We used to have so much fun. The kids loved it, really. Anyhow, he had a 6th grade education. Imagine that. Me telling all about my life to a 6th grader. Are you kidding me? I'm a big shot. I'm a big shot. And so I did. And that was the beginning of really a propulsion, if you will, through the rest of the steps of the program of alcohol. This was the keystone in my recovery for me. 6 and 7 were about character defects that you discover in the 4th step of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, because it's really sort of a narrative about your life in a way, and life stories. I mean, this gets down into specific events. So then in that, I find out what my character defects are. And in 6 and 7, I wrote my character defects and discussed them with my sponsor. 8 and 9. 8 and 9 are in that position for a reason. For a reason. 8 and 9 are there for a reason because they're the most difficult. There is where you go out of your comfort zone even more, because you're going to make some apologies and some amends to people that you hurt over the years, whatever they might be. 8 and 9 are the ones where you need the most guidance. For example, when we would get into a discussion about honesty, I would say to him, Alex, my Scotsman sponsor. I started talking like him. Alec, I said, I'm very honest. He said, well, let's talk about honesty, which is a spiritual principle. So it's really important that in the course of recovery, we discover what the spiritual principles are so that we can examine our own behavior and see if it matches up with the hope that we're living by some spiritual principles, like being honest. He said, you know what, you have to be very careful with honesty. And this 8 and 9, you have to be very careful. We're going to discuss everything that you want to do, because you see, your honesty can hurt other people. I used to say that. I want to be perfectly honest with you about you, not about me. So you can destroy people with honesty. if you're not careful. So we would go through a whole thing of when and where and how I was going to do this particular behavior. And notice, these aren't behaviors. These are things I have to do. I didn't have to do anything until the fourth step when they said, put a pen in your hand and write. Not on a computer. Oh, no. We didn't even have computers then. I said, how about if I type mine? I was a good typist. A, S, D, F, J, K, L, semi, man, I was on fire. I was a clerk typist when I was in the service. I went to school for 8 weeks, and I learned A, S, D, F, J, K, L, semi. I typed about 15 words a minute. I don't know how I got into that. But we said, no computers, no typewriters. You have to write this. Well, why is that? I didn't know. Do you know why that is? Because there's a therapeutic value in writing as opposed to typing. It's a different exercise. And so we wrote out a behavior, shared it with another, a behavior, listed the defects of character in 6, that's a behavior. Ask a power greater than yourself to relieve you of those defects of character, that's a behavior. 8 and 9, made a list of all the people we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all, that's a behavior. Then to make the amends with everybody, that's a behavior. So what we're going to do in AA, Jerry, is we're going to change your behavior. And I said, well, I go to church. I don't need this stuff. I go to church. This is different than church. This is something that's specific to your behavior. Because I have a real interesting experience in churchianity. I don't know how I got into this, but I'm going to go for it. I am the family member of a marriage that in my day was frowned upon. It wasn't racial, it wasn't culture, it was Catholics marrying Protestants. Can you imagine that? A Protestant, a Catholic marrying a Protestant. That was my mom and dad. My mom a Protestant, my father a Catholic. No wonder I drank. No wonder I drank. But seriously, we have two things going here. We have a one belief system here and another belief system here. And what were the children to do? Well, my mom won out, so I was baptized Presbyterian. My mom won out. I went to the Methodist church. And then you have to remember now, I'm an athlete. You don't know this, but in my day, in a room like it's here. It's right in this church, right here where we're sitting. This is a basketball court. We had church leagues and everything. And boy, the Lutherans had the best deal. So guess what? I became a Lutheran when I was 16 years old. Yeah. So I could play in the church league. And then I went to the military. And in the military, at the end of my military career, I converted to Catholicism, which really wasn't a conversion because I knew all about alcoholism, about Catholicism. That's pretty close. From my grandma and grandpa and my father's side. So I went through the whole deal, is what I'm saying. I don't know how I got into this. Probably because there's instructions in my religious experience too. These were sort of a different set of instructions that I hadn't heard before. I don't know why I hadn't heard them before. There's certainly spirituality and religious experiences. But I had never been presented that way is probably the best way for me to explain it, or my experience. of a power greater than myself, and spiritual principles. So 8 and 9 are the most difficult. 8 and 9 are the most difficult for me, because that's when you're going out and you're going eyeball to eyeball, apologizing or making amends to people that you may have hurt along the way. Then I was told, once you do that, 1 to 9, you've cleared the deck of the aircraft carrier. All the planes have been placed in the ship. Yeah, a clear deck. And you're going to live in 10, 11, and 12. That's where the recovery is. In 10, 11, and 12, after you've completed 1 through 9. Step 10 is really steps 4 to 9. And 11 and 12 take care of the other 4 steps. 5 steps. So I did that. But once you do it, you're not finished. You're never finished. Recovery from alcoholism. By the way, alcoholism, I used to say, what? I just came here to quit drinking because people were on my back. I mean, I had a lot of heat going. And I don't know, when you put enough heat on an alcoholic, they will comply. I had a lot of heat on me, so I went to treatment. The rest is history. But the reason I want to mention that is because I didn't come here voluntarily into recovery. This is a whole different thing that I discovered, not because I wanted to, but because circumstances moved me to. And the greatest circumstance was my drinking. I would have never dreamed that my drinking, which was the most destructive thing in my life, would lead me to the most productive thing in my life, which is recovery. I think I'm finished. How did I do?
That was good.
I always appreciate applause because I have very low self-esteem. I used to say, when people come, they say, well, you have low self-esteem. I said, I don't have low self-esteem. Anyhow.
Thanks so much, Jerry.
I did okay?
You did great, very well. Stick around. We might want to ask you some questions during the break. And you'll be
I spoke a long time.
So Jerry will be available during the break. And we're going to take a short break right now and prepare for Jackie Provencher, who will be giving a fantastic, inspirational presentation on boundaries today, or is actually it's